Okay, welcome back. We're on this checklist on page 422. So, talked about fail-safe. If you have some sort of a control or, an IDS or whatever, and something happens that's not expected and you have to shut down, do you lock or unlock the door, for example? And complete mediation, that's kind of a strange term. But access to every object, has to be checked to make sure that you're a legitimate person. Open design. The design should not be a secret. And a possession of, keys and passwords, right? So it's not a secret, but it does depend on secrets. The design itself is not a secret. Got it. Separation of privileges. For example, an ordinary user should be able to use the system without any administrative passwords, those kinds of things, right? 2 keys to unlock rather than 1, those kinds of things. Least privilege, that's what I was talking about. Make sure that the users don't require administrative permissions to be able to do anything. Separation of privileges is where, it takes 2 to tango. Least common mechanism. Minimized mechanisms are variables common to more than one user independent that are developed and dependent on all users. In other words, don't have like a single thing like the building number. Well, there's a heck of a lot of people that use building numbers, so you can't have that part of your password or your entry or whatever. And then psychological acceptability. I mean, in that goofy movie Gattaca, but I got yet another movie reference. The guy goes to a turnstile and sticks his finger on it. It pierces pulls a blood drop out, and checks his DNA to allow him to go through the turnstile. That is not acceptable. Most people are not going to be interested in that. So it's got to have an ease of use, and it's going to be able to make people feel safe. Okay. So, again, kind of a wrap up. Simple, fail-safe, mediation, open, separation, least privilege, shared variables, and acceptability. Okay. So there's a NIST. National, I keep saying this and I keep forgetting what the heck NIST stands for. National Institute. Goodness. I thought I would at least find the NIST. There we go. National Institute of Standards and Technology. Whew, that was tough. Okay. So NIST has a very similar approach to the SDLC. Okay, their approach is not that much different. Here's the normal waterfall investigate. And what they do is they have initiation, a development and acquisition, and then implementing and assessing, because assessment is the testing part, and then operations and maintenance. They throw in the disposal part, which kind of makes sense from their perspective. So this is kind of sort of security, more security related than just the traditional SDLC. Anything weird here catches your eye? No, not really. I mean, it's just a different way of looking at it, right? Okay, so initiation. Here's their way of thinking. Okay. So business requirements in terms of the CIA, right? So I'm going through here. Information categorization, like top secret, or, internal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things that are going in here. So here are the outputs of all this thing. Categorization, security requirements, level, supporting documents, privacy assessment, outputs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this initiation thing basically starts in and says, I now know what the security requirements are for this system. And I know what the privacy requirements are. I know all the requirements. So that's a good way to initiate something. And so it ends up, of course, with a decision to begin development or stop the whole project, right? I mean, that's the trip point. Okay? And so the next one talks about the development and acquisition part. So now I have, access risk, right? Selecting documentation. What are the outputs? A security plan, a list of shared services, a schematic, documents, variations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here are the gates, things you have to do before you can move to the next one. architecture and design review, performance review, functional test review, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, before you go into the implementation plan. So risk assessment, analyzing security, functional testing, the initial certification, if there is such a thing, or some sort of an accreditation, and then do the design. Okay, after that is the implementation assessment, and it's just about as straightforward as you can be. Create the detailed plan and do the initial work. The outputs are a verified list of operational security controls, complete system documentation, all this stuff. So it's all about, this is where, you do it. It, could be a build, could be a, in-house kind of a thing. Conduct the system certification. So here are the gates. I have to have a system readiness review, CNA review, authorization, final project status, financial review, and all this stuff. And now you're ready to go into operations. And so operations are pretty straightforward. Determining the operational readiness. And so once you've got it halfway installed, you can't say, well, we're ready to go. You have to, wait until it's all operational. Then you go, right? And then you manage the configuration like user accounts and things of that nature. And you monitor it to make sure it's working. And then do periodic reauthorization. For example, if this is one of those scenarios where it requires, every 6 months or every year, you have to go in and reauthorize something. This is exactly what we're talking about. Okay, and so basically we're done here, except for the disposal piece. And so this one basically says, have a plan, Before you get rid of the old system, you probably need to archive all sorts of critical information that develop, maybe sanitize the media, go through and, pull out the hard drives and, rub a magnet over them, a demagnetizer kind of a thing, demill, so to speak, the system. And then you dispose of the hardware and software. So pretty straightforward. Okay, Microsoft has one, and it's basically the same thing, except I really like the Microsoft one because it starts with training. This is for programmers now, right? Okay, so I'm doing software now, not an id system. But the first thing is, before you're allowed to go do anything, you're going to have to go through some very serious training on what this all means and how to do this properly. And then establish the requirements, create the gates. What has to, how do I know to move from requirement to design? There's got to be something that says I am done. Okay. And then the design, attack surface analysis and threat modeling. And then implementation, using the tools, do static analysis and verification, making sure everything works. Fuzz testing, that's a cool term. Basically means throw the kitchen sink at it, see what happens. And then attack surface review, and then now you release it. And then you're probably going to have an incident response plan ready, and you're going to have people there to man the phones, right? When you release something, you can't just say, well, here it is, have fun. Because if you call up and say, hey, I'm having trouble with the new product, and the guy at the other end of the phone has never even heard of this thing, and you go, okay. And then, of course, during that time, you have an incident response plan. Anyway, I like this thing. I like the fact that it starts with training and ends with an incident response. Okay. On page 428, they talk about information security project management. Remember the 6 components, okay, of an IS system where you have procedures, people, hardware, software, data, network, right? Okay, same thing here. So you're probably going to have some sort of policy, right? The people you're going to have to train, the hardware, like the technology, you're going to have to hire, climb up a ladder and install it. It's kind of a thing, or maybe install a firewall. Software, you have to, encryption and learning how these things work. The data and the classification of all this, right? And then the network, this could be an awful lot of technology associated with this, and it could be some encryption involved, right? And so you might actually have an official project management office in your organization. I tell you that, the CIS4341 is the Information System Project Management class. Very good class. I'd recommend it. Okay. So now we're getting into project management as a topic on its own. So this is on page 429. So the first thing I talk about is this thing called a work breakdown structure, a WBS. So this is how this is an example of one. So here's a task, conduct field office and confirm network assumptions. So it's going to require a network architect. And here's the start and end dates. Here's the estimated hours, how much it's going to cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so these things, now see, this has a dependency, which means order firewall through the purchasing group before we get to, and then order firewall from the manufacturer, so a lot of dependencies. I can't pack and ship a firewall if I don't have it yet. So some of these things are kind of simple. The best example is, of course, from construction. All right. I can't actually put the asphalt shingles on the roof until the roof decking is complete. Right. That's a clear dependency. Okay. Kind of makes sense. Okay. So let's just talk about what a WBS has in it and what the important parts are. The first part is the work to be done. And it could be a very short description, and you could have like a data dictionary off to the side that explains what all that is. Because, you're going to put this in a chart. You don't want to have it, monstrously long. Well, we're going to do this, and this. No. It should have the activities and the deliverables. What's going to happen when this thing is done? And here's the key, all right? Every single one of these tasks have to be assigned to a person. Maybe not a worker, but assigned to a responsible person like a supervisor. Because here's the thing. If I walked into the classroom and said, this classroom is dirty, it needs to be swept, would anybody go, oh, you mean you want us to do that? That's passive voice. Active voice is, Bob, go get a broom and sweep. It's not, and we're not talking English class here, but active and passive is very important. In the work breakdown structure, you're going to have to say, Bob, you're responsible for either doing this task, or Bob, you're responsible for keeping up with this task and reporting the progress on this task. Anyway, somebody has to be assigned the responsibility by name. Okay, it's extraordinarily important. Okay, and if you have a task out there with nobody assigned to it, it's probably not going to get done. Okay, so the assignments could be done by name, by Bob, or it could be talking about carpenters or finished carpenters or that kind of stuff. You don't have to give them their names. In the number of man hours is clearly, the number of workers times 8 hours a day, that kind of stuff. So it could be done like a resource pool. I mean, let's say you were building houses again. It's just so much easier to talk about this from construction. So I'm a big developer and I've got like 5 or 6 houses being built all at the same time. But I do not have the roofs put on all in the same week because I don't have enough people to do that. I have a pool of roofers. And so they work 2 days on this house, then 2 days on this house, and 2 days. So if this house over here is ready for roof, well, too bad. You're going to have to wait your turn because I have a pool of these things and I can't overextend the pool. Start and end dates, that's pretty straightforward. How long does this thing take? Now, obviously, I can manipulate that. I can put more people against something to squish the dates together. Or in some cases, if I know there's going to be a delay because the roof ain't going to be here yet, well, maybe I'll do the opposite. I'll steal a couple of carpenters from this job and put them over here, and that'll stretch this one out, but the other one gets contracted, right? Just a pool. Okay, so this is how you do a cost estimate. If I know the number of hours, and I know the skill levels implied, their salaries, I can go up and say, okay, I know exactly what the material costs are. I know exactly what the labor costs are. Therefore, this WBS is going to cost me this amount of money. A milestone, typically a milestone is one of those things that's just like a ribbon cutting ceremony or some sort of a thing, it's superficial, but on the schedule, but it has no task associated with it. It's just like, meeting with the press. I just put that down because it's going to take an hour, for me to go out there and do that. And I don't normally charge my time against a project when I'm doing interviews for the local paper. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.